What happens when one of Britain's most beloved morning show hosts comes face to face with a royal who's burned every bridge back home? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with Lorraine Kelly, thinking he can control the narrative one more time. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral when entitlement meets honest journalism. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash on live television. Last night's episode of Lorraine started like any other morning show appearance. The Duke of Sussex had agreed to promote his latest venture, another streaming project that promised to expose more royal secrets. The ITV studio was buzzing with anticipation as cameras rolled and Lorraine Kelly, with her trademark Scottish warmth, welcomed her guest with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "Prince Harry, lovely to have you back on the show," Lorraine began, her smile bright but her eyes already showing a hint of something sharper. "Now, you've got this new documentary coming out, and I have to say, after everything that's happened, I'm curious about your decision to keep, shall we say, sharing your story." Harry shifted in his chair, that familiar defensive posture already creeping in. He was dressed casually in his usual button-down and blazer combination, but there was tension in his shoulders that the cameras picked up immediately. "Well, Lorraine, I think it's important that people hear the truth. There's been so much misinformation, so many lies spread about me and my family." The word family hung in the air with particular weight, and Lorraine's eyebrows raised slightly. She leaned forward, her voice maintaining its friendly tone but with an edge that regular viewers would recognize. "When you say your family, Harry, which family are you referring to exactly? Because from where many of us are sitting, it seems like you've been quite vocal about one family, while being very protective of another." You could feel the temperature in the studio drop several degrees. Harry's jaw tightened, and he took a moment too long to respond, always a bad sign in live television. "I think that's a bit unfair, Lorraine. I've always been protective of my wife and children, which is what any husband and father would do." "Of course," Lorraine nodded, but her tone suggested she wasn't buying it entirely. "But what about being protective of your father, who's battling cancer, or your brother, who's supporting his wife through her own health struggles? Where's that same protective instinct when it comes to them?" The question hit like a sledgehammer, and Harry's media training seemed to abandon him for a moment. His face flushed, and viewers could see his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. That's completely different, and I think you know that. The situation is far more complicated than you're making it out to be." Lorraine wasn't backing down. If anything, she was leaning into the discomfort, recognizing that this was the kind of television moment that defined careers. "Is it though, Harry? Because from the outside looking in, it seems quite simple. You've written books, done interviews, made documentaries, all sharing very private family moments and conversations. But when your family is going through genuine health crises, where are you?" "I don't think you understand the full picture," Harry said, his voice rising slightly. "There are things that happened, things that were said and done, that the public doesn't know about." "Then tell us." Lorraine shot back immediately. "You're here. You've got the platform. You've certainly never been shy about sharing before. What is it that we don't understand?" The challenge was direct and unmistakable. Harry looked genuinely caught off guard, as if he'd expected the usual softball questions about his charitable work and his life in California. Instead, he was facing the kind of scrutiny that he'd been avoiding for years, and it was clear he didn't appreciate it. "Some things are private, Lorraine. Some conversations and family matters should stay within the family." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the studio, least of all Lorraine, who let out a small laugh that somehow managed to sound both amused and incredulous. "That's fascinating, coming from someone who shared private conversations with his father and stepmother in a best-selling memoir. When did this respect for family privacy begin exactly?" Harry's composure was cracking visibly now. His leg was bouncing under the table, and he kept running his hand through his hair. Classic signs of someone losing control of an interview. "Look, I came here to talk about my documentary, about the important work we're doing to highlight mental health issues and support veterans. I didn't come here to be attacked." "Attacked?" Lorraine's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. "Harry, I'm asking you the same questions that millions of people watching at home want answers to. If that feels like an attack, maybe that says more about the questions themselves than about how I'm asking them. The studio audience, which had been politely quiet up to this point, began to murmur. You could sense the energy shifting, with some people clearly uncomfortable with the direction the interview was taking, while others seemed energized by finally seeing someone ask the hard questions. Harry tried to regain control, falling back on his practiced talking points. I've always said that I have nothing but love and respect for my family. My father, my brother, they know how I feel about them. But I also have to protect my own family, and sometimes that means making difficult decisions. Protect them from what exactly? Lorraine pressed. And now, there was no pretense of this being a friendly chat. From visiting a sick grandfather before he died? From attending family events? From having a relationship with their cousins? What exactly are you protecting them from that requires such complete separation? The questions were coming fast now, each one more pointed than the last, and Harry was struggling to keep up. His usual charm and practiced answers weren't working against Lorraine's relentless pursuit of actual answers rather than royal word salad. You're twisting things, Harry said, his voice getting tighter. You're taking complex family dynamics and trying to turn them into some kind of soap opera for your viewers. It was a mistake, a big one. Questioning Lorraine's journalistic integrity on her own show, in front of her own audience, was like poking a tiger with a stick. The host's expression hardened, and anyone who knew her work could see that she was about to shift into a higher gear. I'm sorry, did you just accuse me of turning your family situation into entertainment? Lorraine's Scottish accent became more pronounced, always a warning sign for those who knew her well. That's quite something, coming from someone who's literally made entertainment deals worth millions of dollars based on those exact same family dynamics. The tension in the studio was now palpable, with camera operators zooming in to catch every micro-expression on both faces. This was no longer an interview. It was becoming a confrontation, and everyone in the room could sense that something significant was about to happen. But what came next would leave viewers absolutely stunned, and prove that even royalty isn't immune to being held accountable when they step into the wrong arena with the wrong host. Harry's face had gone from flushed to pale in a matter of seconds, realizing he'd just insulted one of Britain's most respected broadcasters on her own show. But instead of apologizing or trying to backtrack, he doubled down in the most spectacular way possible. I think we both know that morning television thrives on drama and controversy. That's what gets ratings, isn't it? The audacity of the statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Lorraine sat back in her chair, and for a moment, the studio was dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. When Lorraine finally spoke, her voice was dangerously calm. So, let me understand this correctly, Harry. You're sitting here, having made millions from Netflix deals, podcast contracts, and tell-all books about your family, and you're accusing me of exploiting drama for ratings? Her smile was razor-sharp now, nothing warm or welcoming left in it. That's absolutely rich, coming from someone who turned family tragedy into a business model. Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This wasn't going according to any script he'd prepared for, and his handlers in the green room were probably having panic attacks watching their carefully crafted media strategy crumble in real time. That's not. I never said, Harry stammered. But Lorraine was just getting started. No. Let's talk about this properly now that you've opened this door, she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. You want to talk about exploiting drama? Let's discuss how you've monetized your mother's death, your grandmother's final years, your father's parenting, your brother's marriage. Should I go on? The studio audience was now completely captivated, some leaning forward in their seats, as if watching a car crash in slow motion. Social media was undoubtedly exploding, but nobody in that room was looking at their phones. This was unmissable television history being made. Harry tried to regain some composure, but his voice betrayed his growing anger. My mother's death isn't something I've monetized. That's a disgusting thing to suggest. Is it? Lorraine shot back without hesitation. Because every interview you've given, every documentary you've appeared in, every book chapter you've written seems to circle back to Diana. And each time, You get paid handsomely for sharing those memories and that pain. So tell me, what would you call that? The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in a medieval duel. Harry's carefully constructed public persona was cracking before millions of viewers, and everyone could see the entitled, petulant man beneath the polished exterior. You have absolutely no right to speak about my mother or how I choose to honor her memory, Harry said, his voice rising to a level that made the sound technicians scramble to adjust levels. You didn't know her. You don't understand what our family went through. You're absolutely right. I didn't know your mother personally, Lorraine acknowledged, but her tone suggested this concession was leading somewhere uncomfortable for Harry. But I was reporting on the royal family when she died. I saw how devastated this country was, how devastated your father and brother were, how the whole nation grieved with two young boys who'd lost their mother. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering what felt like a killing blow. And I've also watched how you've used that national sympathy, that genuine love people had for Diana, as a shield to deflect criticism while you systematically attack everyone who is also grieving her loss. Harry's hands were visibly shaking now. Whether from rage or shock was hard to tell. That's completely out of line, Lorraine. You're way out of line here. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the truth, and maybe that's what's making you so uncomfortable. Lorraine's voice remained steady, professional, but utterly relentless. You've built an entire brand around being Diana's son, the one who carries her legacy. But what legacy is that exactly? Drama, division, public feuds with family members? The transformation in Harry was remarkable to witness. The charming prince who'd walked onto the set was gone, replaced by someone who looked cornered and desperate. His PR training was failing him completely, and instead of damage control, he was making everything infinitely worse. I don't have to sit here and listen to this character assassination, Harry said, his voice cracking slightly. This isn't journalism. This is a hit job. Lorraine laughed, but there was no humor in it. A hit job? Harry, these are your own words, your own actions, your own choices that I'm asking you about. If that feels like a character assassination, maybe you need to examine the character you've created. The studio was electric now, with production assistants frantically signaling to cameras to make sure they were capturing every angle of this meltdown. This was the kind of television moment that would be replayed for years, analyzed and dissected by media experts and royal watchers alike. You know what? Harry said, standing up abruptly, his microphone pack nearly pulling him back down as he forgot he was still wired for sound. I came here thinking you were different, thinking you'd give me a fair platform to discuss important issues. Instead, you're just another tabloid journalist looking for a gotcha moment. The insult hit its mark, and now Lorraine stood up too, her Scottish fire fully ignited. Tabloid journalist? I've been in this business for 30 years, Harry. I've interviewed prime ministers, celebrities, ordinary people with extraordinary stories. I've never once had to rely on trashing my own family to make a career. At least I'm not making a career out of tearing down people who can't defend themselves. Harry shot back, apparently forgetting that he was very much capable of defending himself, and was doing a spectacularly poor job of it. Can't defend themselves? Lorraine's voice rose for the first time, matching Harry's energy. Your father is the King of England. Your brother is the heir to the throne. And you're saying they can't defend themselves? The same people you've been attacking in books and interviews for years while living in a mansion in California? The hypocrisy was so glaring that even Harry seemed to realize he'd walked into a trap of his own making. His face cycled through several expressions: anger, confusion, realization, and back to anger again. This is exactly why I left, he said, gesturing wildly at the cameras and the audience. This toxic environment, this constant attacking, this inability to have an honest conversation without everything being twisted and manipulated. But Lorraine wasn't about to let him paint himself as the victim, not after what he'd just put her through. Honest conversation? Harry, I've been asking you honest questions for the past 20 minutes, and you've deflected, insulted me, insulted my profession, and accused me of exploiting your family's pain while simultaneously promoting a documentary that does exactly that. If anyone's being dishonest here, it's not me. The truth of her words seemed to hit Harry like a physical blow, And what happened next would become the most talked about moment in morning television history. For a split second, Harry looked genuinely stunned, as if he couldn't believe someone had actually called him out so directly on live television. But rather than taking a moment to reflect or attempt any kind of graceful recovery, he made the worst possible choice. He completely lost his composure. "You know what, Lorraine?" Harry's voice was now loud enough that viewers at home probably had to turn down their volume. "This is exactly the kind of toxic, vindictive behavior that drove me out of this country in the first place. You people are obsessed with tearing down anyone who dares to speak their truth." The word truth seemed to trigger something explosive in Lorraine, who had clearly reached her breaking point with Harry's victim narrative. "Your truth? Harry, let me tell you about truth. Truth is your grandfather lying in a hospital bed while you were doing tell-all interviews. Truth is your grandmother spending her final years watching her family implode on international television. Truth is your father getting crowned king while his son was on another continent, making Netflix documentaries about how terrible his family island." Her voice was powerful now, carrying 30 years of journalistic authority and Scottish determination. The studio audience was completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented in the usually cordial world of morning television. Harry's face went through a series of expressions that ranged from shock to rage to something that looked almost like panic. "How dare you bring my grandparents into this? They're gone. They can't defend themselves from your attacks." "I'm not attacking them, Harry." Lorraine's voice cracked like a whip. "I'm pointing out that they're gone, and you spent their final years putting them through hell for a paycheck. And now you have the absolute gall to come on my show and accuse me of exploiting family drama when that's literally your entire career." The accusation hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Harry stood there, mouth agape, apparently having no prepared response for someone who would dare to be this direct about his behavior. His media training had never covered what to do when someone refused to let him control the narrative. "This interview is over," Harry said, reaching for his microphone pack with shaking hands. "I'm not going to sit here and be ambushed by someone who clearly has an agenda." But Lorraine wasn't finished with him yet. "An agenda? My agenda is asking you the questions that millions of people want answers to. My agenda is doing my job as a journalist, instead of letting you use my show as free publicity for your latest money-making venture." Harry struggled with his microphone for several more seconds, his fingers fumbling with the battery pack clipped to his belt. The technical difficulties were making his dramatic exit look more like a comedy sketch, which only seemed to infuriate him further. "You people will never understand," he muttered, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "You're all part of the same toxic system that destroyed my mother and that tried to destroy my wife." That was the final straw for Lorraine, who stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper that somehow carried more weight than all the shouting. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare bring up your mother's death to justify your behavior when you've spent years using her memory as a weapon against your own family. Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become." The words hit Harry like a physical slap. His face went white, then red, then white again. For a moment, it looked like he might actually say something truly unforgivable, but instead, he finally managed to unhook his microphone and threw it down on his chair with enough force to make a loud thudding sound that echoed through the studio. "This country hasn't changed at all," he said, his voice bitter and defeated. "Same toxic press, same vindictive people, same refusal to let anyone move forward or heal. I'm done with all of you." He started walking toward the exit, but Lorraine wasn't about to let him have the last word on her own show. "That's right, Harry. Walk away, just like you walked away from your family, your duties, your country. But remember this, we'll still be here doing the work, asking the hard questions, holding people accountable long after your Netflix deals run out." Harry stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one final time, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "You have no idea what you're talking about. None of you do." "Then enlighten us," Lorraine shouted after him. "Stop running away and answer the questions. Explain how you're the victim in all this. Tell us how abandoning your sick grandfather and your cancer-stricken father makes you the hero of this story." But Harry was already walking off the set, his departure tracked by every camera in the studio. You could hear his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence, and then the sound of a door slamming somewhere off camera. The studio remained dead quiet for several long seconds, with Lorraine standing alone on the set, chest heaving from the emotional intensity of what had just occurred. Finally, she turned back to the cameras, her professional composure returning like armor clicking into place. "Well," she said, smoothing down her jacket and walking back to her desk, "I think that tells us everything we need to know about how Prince Harry handles difficult questions." She sat down, picked up her notes, and looked directly into the camera with the kind of steady gaze that had made her a trusted figure in British television for 3 decades. "We'll be right back after this break, and I'll be joined by royal correspondent Sarah Mitchell to discuss what we've just witnessed and what it means for the future of the Sussex brand." As the show cut to commercial, cameras captured Lorraine sitting calmly at her desk, completely in control, while chaos erupted in the background. Production assistants were running around, phones were ringing, and you could hear heated conversations happening just off camera. But Lorraine remained centered, professional, and utterly unshaken by what had just transpired. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. Harry had stormed off like a petulant child who couldn't handle being challenged, while Lorraine had maintained her dignity and professionalism throughout the entire ordeal. It was a masterclass in how to handle someone who's used to controlling every narrative, and it had played out in front of millions of viewers who were undoubtedly already sharing clips and commentary across every social media platform. When the cameras stopped rolling during the commercial break, the studio erupted in a buzz of conversation. Crew members who had worked in television for decades were saying they'd never seen anything quite like it. A member of the royal family completely losing composure on live television and storming off a respected show because he couldn't handle basic accountability. This wasn't just a failed interview, it was a complete demolition of Harry's carefully crafted public image. Accomplished not through tabloid sensationalism or gotcha journalism, but through persistent, professional questioning that he simply couldn't answer. Lorraine had done what years of royal protocol and deference had prevented others from doing. She had treated him like any other public figure who needed to account for their actions and contradictions. The aftermath would dominate headlines for weeks. But in that moment, as Lorraine prepared for the next segment of her show, one thing was crystal clear. She had just reminded everyone, including Harry himself, that titles and privilege mean nothing when you're sitting across from a journalist who refuses to be intimidated, manipulated, or fooled by carefully crafted PR narratives. The interview was over. Harry was gone, and morning television would never be quite the same again.